There's a number sitting inside most people's heads, a number they've decided means safety. For some, it's $10,000. For others, it's $50,000. For a lot of people I talk to, it's somewhere around $100,000. The idea is simple. Get to that number and the anxiety goes away. Get to that number and you'll finally feel okay. Here's the thing nobody tells you. People hit that number all the time, and the anxiety doesn't go away because it was never about the number. Today, I want to talk about the savings account myth, the belief that parking money in a savings account is the same thing as building wealth. It isn't, and the gap between those two things is quietly costing millions of people decades of financial progress they will never get back. Let me show you exactly what I mean. The average high-yield savings account in 2026 pays somewhere between 4.5% and 5.2% annually. That sounds decent, and compared to the 0.5% most traditional savings accounts pay, it is decent. But here's the number that changes the math entirely. Inflation has averaged roughly 3 to 4% per year over the last 4 years. When you subtract inflation from your savings rate, your real return, the purchasing power you're actually gaining, shrinks to somewhere between 1% and 2%. Your money is growing, just barely, and in some years it isn't growing at all in real terms. It's treading water while the rest of the economy moves forward without it. Now, compare that to the stock market. The S&P 500 has delivered an average annual return of approximately 10% over the long term. Adjusted for inflation, that's roughly 7% of real growth per year. The difference between 1% and 7% doesn't sound enormous when you say it out loud. Over 30 years, it is the difference between $100,000 becoming $134,000 and that same $100,000 becoming $761,000. Same money, same 30 years, a $627,000 gap created entirely by where the money sat. I want you to sit with that number for a second. $627,000. Gone. Not spent, not lost to bad decisions, just never earned because the money stayed in the wrong place. This is not a knock on savings accounts. They serve a critical function, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the savings account has been sold to an entire generation as the responsible, safe, smart thing to do with money. And for a lot of people, that advice has been deeply, quietly expensive. So let's talk about what actually builds wealth, and more importantly, why most people aren't doing it. The first thing I want to address is the safety illusion. The reason people keep too much money in savings accounts isn't ignorance, it's psychology. Money in a savings account feels safe in a way that money in the market doesn't. You can see it, you can touch it, the number never goes down. And after a few cycles of watching the market drop 20 or 30% in a year, which it does regularly as a normal part of how markets work, the savings account starts to feel like the only sane place to keep anything. But here's what that thinking costs you. The market drops are real. The recoveries are also real. The S&P 500 has recovered from every single downturn in its history. Every one. The dot-com crash, the 2008 financial crisis, the pandemic drop of 2020. Each time the market fell, each time it came back higher than it was before. The people who moved their money to savings during those drops locked in their losses. The people who stayed invested recovered and then some. Safety feels like protection. Over long periods of time, it functions more like slow erosion. The second thing I want to address is the emergency fund confusion. This one is important because a lot of people are conflating two completely separate things: emergency funds and wealth building. They are not the same thing. They should not be in the same account. They should not even be thought about in the same sentence. An emergency fund is insurance.
It exists for one purpose: to cover genuine financial emergencies without forcing you to sell investments at a bad time or go into debt. The standard recommendation is 3 to 6 months of living expenses, liquid, accessible, sitting in a high-yield savings account where it earns a modest return while it waits for the emergency that hopefully never comes. That money should not be invested in the market. That money needs to be there on a random Tuesday when your car breaks down or your job disappears. The market doesn't care about your Tuesday. But here is where most people go wrong. They fund the emergency account, they watch it grow, they feel secure, and they stop there. They never move on to step two, which is taking every dollar beyond the emergency fund and putting it to work in something that actually compounds at a meaningful rate. The emergency fund becomes the destination instead of the foundation. If you have more than 6 months of expenses sitting in a savings account right now and no significant investment portfolio, you have an emergency fund and a stagnating pool of money that is losing ground to inflation every single day. That second pool needs to move. Let me walk you through the framework that actually builds wealth, not the one that feels safe, the one that works.
Step 1 is what I just described. 3 to 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account, fully funded, never touched except for genuine emergencies. This is your foundation. Without it, every market downturn becomes a potential crisis. With it, market downturns become irrelevant noise. Step 2 is maxing out your tax-advantaged accounts before anything else. This is where most people leave enormous amounts of money on the table. A 401k, a Roth IRA, an HSA if you have access to one. These accounts are not just investment vehicles, they are tax shelters. Money inside a Roth IRA grows completely tax-free. You put in after-tax dollars, and every dollar of growth, every dividend, every capital gain, every percentage point of appreciation over the next 30 years is yours to keep without paying a cent in taxes when you withdraw it in retirement. The 2026 contribution limit for a Roth IRA is $7,000. That's $583 per month. For someone who starts contributing at 30 and earns a 10% average annual return, $7,000 per year becomes approximately $1.26 million by age 65, tax-free, entirely. The IRS gets nothing. The 401k contribution limit in 2026 is $23,500. If your employer matches any portion of that, contributing at least enough to capture the full match is mandatory, not recommended, mandatory. That match is a 50% to 100% instant return on your money before it's even invested. There is no investment on earth that guarantees that. Not capturing it is the equivalent of turning down free money because the paperwork felt complicated. Step 3 is investing in broad market index funds, not individual stocks, not actively managed funds, not cryptocurrency as a primary wealth building strategy. Index funds. Here is why. The vast majority of actively managed funds, funds run by professional investors whose entire job is to beat the market, underperform a simple S&P 500 index fund over any 10-year or longer period. The data on this is not ambiguous, it is overwhelming. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of actively managed funds lag the index over 15 years. The professionals, with their research teams and their algorithms and their decades of experience, cannot consistently beat a fund that simply owns everything and charges almost nothing to do it. A low-cost S&P 500 index fund charges somewhere between 0.03% and 0.10% in annual fees. An actively managed fund charges 1% to 2%. That difference doesn't sound like much. Over 30 years on a $200,000 portfolio, a 1% fee difference costs you approximately $180,000 in lost returns. You pay that in exchange for a fund that, statistically, is likely to perform worse than the index it's trying to beat.
The math on index investing is not exciting. That's the point. Boring is the strategy. You own everything, you pay almost nothing, you never sell, you let time do the work. That's it. That's the whole strategy that has created more ordinary millionaires than anything else in the history of the stock market. Step 4 is what I call the automation stack. This is the piece that makes steps 1 through 3 actually happen instead of remaining as intentions. Here's how it works. Your paycheck hits your checking account on the same day, not the next day, not at the end of the month, the same day. A series of automatic transfers fire. A fixed amount moves to your high-yield savings account, a fixed amount moves to your brokerage account for index fund purchases. Your 401k contribution is already happening through payroll before you ever see the check. You spend what's left, not what you plan to save, what's left after everything that matters has already moved. The automation stack removes every single decision from the process. There is no month where you decide it's tight and skip the investment contribution. There is no moment of temptation where the transfer doesn't happen because something else felt more urgent. The system runs whether you remember or not, whether you're motivated or not, whether the market is up or down or sideways. The consistency is built into the infrastructure, not dependent on your willpower on any given Tuesday. I want to talk about something that sits underneath all of this, because the mechanics of wealth building are not complicated. You could explain them in 20 minutes to someone who has never thought about money before, and they would understand. The mechanics are not the problem. The problem is a story most of us absorbed somewhere along the way that goes something like this. Investing is for rich people, or for people who understand finance, or for people who have extra money after everything else is handled. Regular people with regular salaries save what they can and hope it's enough. That story is wrong, and it is expensive to believe. The research on wealth accumulation is consistent and clear. The majority of millionaires in the United States are not people who inherited money, or launched successful companies, or stumbled into windfalls. They are people who earned ordinary incomes, saved ordinary percentages of those incomes, and invested consistently over long periods. A 2019 study found that the majority of millionaires surveyed had never had a single year of income above $100,000. They built their wealth on salaries that looked completely unremarkable from the outside. The difference between them and the people who reached retirement with nothing wasn't income, it was behavior. Specifically, one behavior. They started investing early, they kept investing consistently, and they did not stop when the market made it feel uncomfortable.
That behavior is available to anyone. It doesn't require a finance degree or a sophisticated understanding of markets or a high income. It requires a brokerage account, a low-cost index fund, and an automatic transfer that runs every month without asking for your permission. Now I want to address the question I know is sitting in the back of your mind, because it sits in the back of everyone's mind when this conversation starts to feel real. What if the market crashes right after I invest? It's a fair question, and the honest answer is it might. Markets crash. They have crashed before, and they will crash again. There will almost certainly be a year in your investing lifetime where your portfolio drops 30% or 40%, and the news tells you that this time is different, that the old rules don't apply, that the recovery might not come. Here is what the data actually shows. Someone who invested $500 per month in the S&P 500 starting in January 2000, one of the worst possible times to start, right before the dot-com crash, would have watched their portfolio lose nearly half its value in the first 2 years. If they had stopped investing, locked in the loss, moved everything to savings, they would have experienced exactly what they feared. If they kept investing, through the crash, through the recovery, through the 2008 crisis, through every subsequent downturn, their $500 monthly contribution would have grown to over $650,000 by 2026. The crashes were part of the journey, not a reason to stop, a reason to keep going, because every crash is a period where you are buying shares at a discount. Time in the market beats timing the market. This is not a motivational phrase. It is a statistical description of how compound growth actually works. Every year you spend out of the market waiting for the right moment is a year of compounding you will never recover. Here is the framework one more time, clean and simple. First, 3 to 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account, funded fully, touched only for genuine emergencies. Second, max out your tax-advantaged accounts, 401k to the employer match at minimum, Roth IRA if you qualify, HSA if you have access. Third, invest the rest in broad market index funds, low cost, diversified. Set it and leave it alone. Fourth, automate everything. The automation is not optional, it is the system that makes the other 3 steps actually happen. The savings account is not your enemy, but it is not your future either. It is the floor beneath you, the thing that keeps a bad month from becoming a financial crisis. Everything above that floor should be working harder than 5% per year. Everything above that floor should be in the market, compounding, building the wealth that a savings account will never, on its own, create. The woman checking her account with calm every morning isn't calm because she has money in savings. She's calm because she built a system. She knows the emergency fund is there if she needs it. She knows the investments are growing whether she checks them or not. She knows that time is on her side in a way that it wasn't when she was only saving. That calm is a product of structure, not luck, and the structure is available to anyone willing to build it. If you want to take the first step today, it's this: open a Roth IRA. It takes about 15 minutes. You don't have to put anything in it yet, just open it. The opening creates commitment in a way that the intention never does. Once the account exists, the next step becomes obvious. That is where it starts. Not with a perfect plan, not with a certain income level, not when things feel more stable. With one account, opened today, that begins the process of making your money work harder than a savings account ever could. One more thing before you go. I want to address the people watching this who feel like they're starting too late, who are in their 40s or 50s and doing the math in their heads right now and feeling something between frustration and dread, because those feelings are real and they deserve a real response. You are not too late. Starting at 45 with nothing and investing $500 a month at a 7% return still produces over $200,000 by 65. Starting at 50 and saving aggressively for 15 years still changes your retirement picture dramatically compared to saving nothing. The compounding is less powerful than it would have been at 25. It is still powerful. It still works. The best time to start was 20 years ago. The second best time is now, today, before you finish watching this. The people who reach retirement with nothing don't get there because they made one catastrophic mistake. They get there because they delayed the start over and over again, each time for a reason that felt reasonable in the moment. One more year, one more raise, once the kids are out of school, once the car is paid off. The delays compound just like the investments do, except in the wrong direction. Don't let this be another video you found interesting and then didn't act on. Open the account today, set the transfer this week. The system you build in the next 30 days will be doing work for you in 30 years, whether you think about it or not.